Standard 13 is the politics of geography or political geography. Looking at the postcard image on this slide, it would be much easier to understand the world if this was all we had to think about. How did this planet become the 200-plus countries it is today? How did people gain national identities? How did people acquire their cultural systems? How did certain parts of the world attain their political power and influence over other parts or regions? How do certain parts of the world maintain their power and influence over other parts or regions? And how might certain parts of the world lose their power and influence over other parts of the planet? The world is made up of countries, nations, states, nation-states, diverse cultures, peoples, systems, and institutions that are at once independent and created by the people that live there, as well as interdependent on each other for some resource or another. In this unit, Unit 13, we look at political geography. In the past two standards, 11 and 12, we've looked at networks and connections of transportation and commerce in Standard 11, and in Standard 12 we examined human settlement patterns. If we think that the interconnections and networks of transportation, commerce, and the way in which human beings settle on Earth are complex, here we'll add yet another layer of complexity: politics. This slide talks about nations and states. A state is politically independent, has official boundaries, and is legally recognized. The image on this slide shows the central United States. A nation is represented by a culture group or people with a common ancestry. In the United States and in Arizona, the Indian nations are an example of this concept. A nation-state, for example, France and Japan, are good examples of nation-states. They are countries that are legally recognized, have borders, and the people identify with one common culture: French in France and Japanese culture in Japan. There are some states which have more than one nation, such as Canada and Belgium, and some nations, like the Kurds in the Middle East, who have no state. Where and how does Arizona fit into the U.S. and world puzzle? Arizona is a state, of course, which will celebrate its state centennial in 2012. In addition, within the boundaries of Arizona are Indian nations: the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Nation, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, and 18 other Indian nations comprise about 1/4 of Arizona's land territory. Here we're going to talk about how the forces of cooperation and conflict among people influence the division and control of Earth's surface. Throughout history, and indeed prehistory, human societies have both competed and cooperated over land and resources, boundaries, ores, access, restriction, and just about everything else. It's important for geographers to understand the connectedness and interdependence, and sometimes isolation, of all countries on the planet. A big picture synthesizing knowledge of the world is essential to understanding how, at least a little, how the world's systems of trade, communication, migration systems, cultural systems, wars, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and truth commissions work. How can we make sense of all of this? For example, the picture on this slide in the upper left corner about protecting the Great Lakes illustrates how states and two independent countries can cooperate around a very important issue that might otherwise be cause for conflict: the use and maintenance and protection of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. The 8 Great Lakes states are Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, and the 2 Canadian provinces are Ontario and Quebec. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact is an agreement between the 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces to regulate diversion of the water from the Great Lakes Basin. The goal is to provide protection and sustainable use of the Great Lakes for future generations. Just a side note, the word rivalry comes from the Latin rivalis, or one who uses the same water or river as another. In this case, hopefully the Great Lakes Compact will eliminate the need for conflict or rivalry around water issues and will hopefully foster cooperation from all states and countries involved. The example of the Great Lakes Compact works well to illustrate the concept of enlightened self-interest, which Alexis de Tocqueville talked about in his book Democracy in America. De Tocqueville noted that when people are discussing or debating or deliberating a controversial issue, such as water use and water rights and water protection, that if people only look at their own self-interest, their decisions will be less fitting or comprehensible or sustainable, although de Tocqueville did not use that term. However, the idea is this: once people realize that preserving the quality and availability of a resource for the benefit of all, let's say water, is indeed in the best interest of the individual as well as the larger community, their decisions will be more encompassing and fitting for the greater whole. In other words, if everyone understands that it is important to be a steward of the land or the water, in the long run everyone benefits, and therefore exhibits enlightened self-interest. The Dalai Lama, what's his message? He makes a number of observations on the concept of enlightened self-interest. He suggests that we need new perceptions and concepts to see differently and to be effective in the 21st century. I quote, "This enlightened self-interest is a product of balance among narrow self-interests, community or shared interests, and altruistic or other interests. Enlightened self-interest means that we cannot simply maximize or minimize any one particular aspect or dimension of our lives. We cannot be driven solely by greed, by altruism, or by concern for community. Instead, we must pay conscious attention to whether we are adequately meeting our needs as individuals, as members of some larger community or society, and as moral, ethically responsible humans. Quality of life is a consequence of harmony or balance among the three. We can choose to pursue our enlightened self-interest rather than simply give in to our greed. We can set examples and build models that others may choose to follow. We can develop the foundation of reality upon which new theories for an economics of enlightened self-interest can be built. We can help guide humanity toward a sustainable future. And we can do it at any time we choose." End quote. At a public talk on universal responsibility, the Dalai Lama described what he called the new reality. The new reality is one in which the challenges facing humanity are beyond individual effort, and our independencies have become more pronounced and more important. These challenges are being created by the global population explosion, unsustainable exploitation of natural resources, growing inequality, both between and within nations, and global change. They will require humanity as a whole to look at common threads as one entity. So, returning to the theme of this slide as it relates to political geography and conflict and cooperation, the major issues affecting humanity in this century will be tackled through common, cooperative agreements based in long-term interests. Although it is not adjacent to the Colorado River, a major part of central Arizona's water supply comes from the Colorado River. The map on this page shows the geographic extent of the river passing through 7 states and into Mexico. Each of these 7 states share the water, and Mexico receives what is left over at the end. The compact divides the river basin into the upper division, comprised of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and the lower division, comprised of Nevada, Arizona, and California. There are 6 major dams on the lower division of the river. The Colorado River Compact was established in 1922, and the CAP, the Central Arizona Project, diverts water from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson by way of a canal that starts in Lake Havasu City. What happens to the river when it reaches Mexico? Sitting on her family's failing farm in Sonora, Mexico, a grandmother is comforted by her granddaughter in the picture we see at the lower bottom right. The Colorado River used to provide plenty of water to keep the farm thriving. Overuse of the river has caused the entire area to dry up. This slide is a repeat of a slide we saw in Standard 12. It's the area between Boston and Washington, D.C. It's plain to see that this region, Boswatch, is interconnected spatially and economically, and therefore it behooves the leaders in the region to behave in a cooperative manner to preserve and maintain the economic, transportation, cultural, and even historical advantage of this region. On this slide, we explore spatial divisions. In the U.S., although we are united as a single country, there are 2 states that are not physically attached to the other 48 states, Alaska and Hawaii, seen in the upper left section of this slide. During the Civil War, the North and South were divided and fought against each other. The map on the top right of this slide shows the United States of America, the Confederate States, and the border states during the Civil War. There are state capitals and governments in all 50 states, and those political units are further divided by counties and by farmland and municipalities and state land and Indian land and federal land. The maps at the bottom of this slide depict 2 states. Texas, broken into its 257 small counties, the highest number of counties in any U.S. state. Compare that to the 15 counties in Arizona. And a map of the state of Illinois, with an inset showing one of its counties, and that county further broken down into 2 municipalities. Not only is Earth divided by physical and political divisions, but also religious divisions, language, culture, and ethnic or tribal divisions, among others. In the map on this slide, we see the predominant religious affiliations in the U.S. by county as of 2000. The map at the bottom of the slide is broken into states and counties of the country where languages other than English are spoken at home by percentage of overall residents. Ask yourself, what type of impact does religious or cultural or language or tribal diversity across the United States have on the culture or the politics or the identity and values of the United States? Some land is sacred, like Indian burial grounds and cemeteries and places of worship. In this slide, we see a picture of the entrance to an Ojibwe, Chippewa Indian burial grounds. And in the upper right corner of the slide, we see a marker indicating the site of an old Negro burial ground, which reads, "The land beyond this tunnel was once part of a cemetery for slaves and poor free blacks." The exact size and shape is unknown, as is the number of persons once interred. What happened to their remains is a mystery as well. This was also the site of the city hanging grounds. Slave rebellion leader Gabriel Prosser was executed here. Several stones from the gallows platform were used in the construction of the Broad Street overpass. You can see them on the other side of the tunnel, to your right. They are the largest blocks in the wall. Some land is utilitarian, mined, fished, deforested, or hunted. The map at the bottom of this slide is a map of the Bureau of Land Management's public lands and office locations. The Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, manages 264.2 million acres of land. That is about equal to 11% of the total U.S. acreage. In addition, the Bureau is responsible for about 300 million additional acres of subsurface mineral resources. The BLM is also responsible for wildlife management and suppression on 388 million acres of land. Some more examples of local divisions of space are land use zones in municipalities, administrative districts for airports, areas of essential services such as water supply, sewage and garbage districts, and school districts. On this slide on the left, we see a map of Arizona land use, agricultural, industrial, mining, and tourism. On the right side of the slide, we see a map of the Valley of the Sun, or the Phoenix metropolitan area, broken down into its 25 municipalities. Franchise areas, strip malls, regional divisions of national and multinational corporations, and free trade zones indicate the economic division of space. In this slide, we see a picture of a strip mall, which some argue has somewhat of a standardized look across the country. Also, city neighborhood associations, suburban homeowners associations, and even the divisions of neighborhood space by gangs on the basis of socioeconomic status, race, or national origin illustrate the power of social and cultural divisions of space. On the right side of this slide, we see a sign announcing one neighborhood's annual HOA meeting, and at the bottom, we see a neighborhood in Michigan infested by gang members from El Salvador, the Mara Salvatrucha gang. The interlocking and interconnected systems for dividing and controlling Earth's space influence all dimensions of people's lives, including trade, culture, citizenship, and voting, travel, and self-identity. Students must understand the origins, layout, and structure, and the political, economic, and social power of these divisions to appreciate their role within a world that is both globally interdependent and locally controlled. This presentation is by Beth Larson, School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning, Arizona State University, 2011.